Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our series of dialogues we've been hosting with the artists featured in Caddy's digital exhibition, On Protest and Mourning. I'm Aneiza Ali, the curator of the exhibition, and I'm so excited and really honored to welcome to our conversation our featured filmmaker, Carlos Javier Ortiz, and his 2014 documentary, We All We Got, which is a truly moving elegy for the city of Chicago as it grappled with violence and loss while trying to rebuild. Carlos, welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So let me share with our audience a little bit about you, if I may. Carlos is a director, cinematographer, and documentary photographer who focuses on urban life, gun violence, racism, poverty, and marginalized communities. In 2016, Carlos received a Guggenheim Fellowship for Film. His work has been exhibited nationally and internationally, including here in our backyard at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, the International Museum of Photography and Film, and the Library of Congress. And his films have been screened at the Los Angeles International Film Festival, the AFI Film Festival, and we're in for a treat because you can see Carlos's work at the Tribeca Film Festival here in New York later this June. Carlos, it's so wonderful to have you with us.
Thank you, Grace. I've been looking forward to tonight, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. The three of us at one point, and having Laurence and I just break out. So thanks for putting us together here, in front of this crowd. Thank you.
Thank you. As Carlos mentioned, joining us in conversation tonight is Laurence Ralph, who is a professor of anthropology at Princeton University and the director of the Center on Transnational Policing. And I should say, Laurence, Carlos needs to welcome you to the Guggenheim Club because, Laurence, you recently received the 2021 Guggenheim Fellowship. That's wonderful. Congratulations. Laurence's book, Renegade Dreams, Living Through Injury in Gangland Chicago, which features one of Carlos's photographs on the cover, grapples with the consequences of the war on drugs, together with mass incarceration and the perils of gun violence. And Laurence, it's such an important and timely work, and it was also recently awarded the 2021 J.I. Stanley Prize for Outstanding Scholarship in Anthropology. So kudos again for all the prizes, and welcome to the Guggenheim Club.
Thank you. Thank you for that intro, and it's also a pleasure to be here. So thank you for having me on this platform as well.
Well, I'm not done. As I was sharing with Carlos and Laurence earlier, before we went live, an equally important note about your bio, and I have to say this because this is the Caribbean Cultural Center, is that, and this is just as important as the Guggenheim, your parents are Guyanese, so that's also a very important thing to note. So we welcome you to the fold.
Thank you. They'll be happy that you did that.
I'm happy to know that you're Guyanese. So Carlos and Laurence, it's really important for us to have both of your voices and your insight in this project, in this exhibition, in this dialogue, because you both think critically about place and the built environment throughout your work as you're examining, I think, both the invisible and the visible impact of violence in our communities. And I want you to know that, in selecting this film for the exhibition, I really thought about when it was made in 2014, almost 7 years ago. And I was really struck by what it means to watch it now, Carlos, to really wrestle with it in this moment, in this particular fragile climate of violence against Black lives. And I found it timely, and this is why, it was really important for us to have it in this project. I found it timely for not only the moment it was made in, but also it was quite foretelling for where we are now and where we have ended up. And I know that both of you will talk about that in your conversation with each other. So for our audience watching, we're going to screen the film in full shortly. But what I hope that you do is pay attention to the soundscape of this film, as well as its visual narrative. Here in Harlem, where I live, where Caddy is located, oftentimes throughout the last year, we would hear the sounds of protest reverberating throughout this neighborhood before we would actually see the protests. And so it was on that note that we commissioned a very moving score by composer Kareem Johnson to do just that, to really help us understand what protest and mourning sounds like, to tap into how we listen to grief and how we can hear rage. And this film, Carlos, really allows us to do just that. It gives us the space to hear, to listen to the chants and the laments of the documentary's protagonists, to really hear how a city composes an elegy for the lives that are lost. And so I just wanted to take that moment to thank you for making a film that compels us to listen as much as it allows us to see. So thank you for that, Carlos.
Thank you. Thank you.
So tonight we'll hear from Carlos and he will introduce the film. We will screen it in its entirety, which is just under 9 minutes. And then we will hear from Carlos and Laurence in conversation with each other. For audience watching, as always, please do share your thoughts and questions in the chat or in the comments, and we will take them up in the Q&A portion of our conversation. So Carlos, the screen is yours.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I have a few notes of more of when you see the film in a minute or two, or very soon. When I was composing the film and the edit, I was really thinking about visualizing. And thank you, Grace, for putting words in my mouth, because I forget how it all came together. But you know, visualizing what I felt, what I saw. The sounds of the landscape, the trees, and that's very Chicago. It's very, you know, to me, the city landscape, the sounds of the city was very important. But also, you know, the vision of what the city goes through, and it's what it's gone through. And Laurence will hopefully bring up that history when he talks about his work. And I'll ask him, you know, in his work, he talks about the Great Migration, and that history still lingers in Chicago very much so. And I think much more than any other city, maybe besides New York, maybe New York and Chicago have like this Chicago's more underground, but they have the same relationship to the Great Migration. But you know, I didn't know all that when I was making it. I just knew these you know, these stories, and I was trying to piece them together. So I thought I was going to make an hour-long film, and I ended up making a 9-minute film, and it was really a visualization about a feeling, and a thought, you know, and also a memory I wanted to leave behind for. Another question I'll ask Laurence, but for my child, for the child I think I would have in the future, how would he or her would see it. I have a boy, but yeah, and so I was thinking of all these things as I was editing, and for the children that have been lost in Chicago, and the parents as well. So we can, I think we can start the movie and the film, and then come back to a conversation.
so that no one will be able to say that they are water spilled on the ground.
Got shot in the head, right on the Guston Avers. You know what I'm saying? Shot in my face when I was 8 years old, over about home in Walnut. But still, I'm still trying to breathe, I'm still trying to do something good. Ain't got no job, but I'm still trying to do something good. I ain't frustrated yet, but I ain't gonna hurt nobody. They're gonna try to do what I can do to survive. It's called out surviving. The difference between surviving, you gotta live. I'm living the right way. Stop the killing. Stop the violence. Stop the killing. Stop the violence. Cease fire. Cease fire. Cease fire. Peace. Now. Peace. Now. Peace.
They said he got shot in the chest. The only thing I saw, I ain't know he got shot more than once. I knew he got shot in the neck. He's like, I'm shot. He must have been shot. Yeah, they had a towel on his neck. He was right on the floor. Because if he only got shot in his neck, he would have been.
Jesus Christ, let everybody shout amen. Amen. Let's say Darius. 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 God bless you.
In this past school year, as of today, 27 CPS students have been killed. As of today, 229 CPS students have been shot. That's not even counting alternative schools, dropouts. That's only Chicago public school students, because nobody's counting the other numbers. But this violence has real faces on it. Now we want to call the names of the children from CPS that died this school year by gun violence. Before we do that, every mother or father out here who's lost a child, would you raise your hand? Every person out here who's a family member or a friend who has been shot or killed, lift your hand. It's called insanity.
That's right. That's right.
Put silence now as we call up the names of those children who lost their lives.
D'Antonio Goss, Joel Baitner, Michael Pierce, Christopher Travis, William Luttrell, Darnell Choice, Jawan Brooks, Andrew Powell, Michael Frazier Jr., Damian Caesar, Isaiah Mendes.
Generation is young. A lot of us still try to do good, but we already labeled from our history to say that we bad. Because our choices we make at a young age, but they say we already knew what we was doing. How we know what we was doing, we never had a guy. That's like a little kid that a mother tell and yell at him to sweep the floor. But he don't know how to sweep the floor because she never taught him how to sweep the floor. You gotta teach her something before it's over with. And now, it ain't gonna be too much over with. It's just have guidance. Hopefully be better. Till then, everything is like a movement that we can pray to be better. To our Most High. No matter what God's name is, be our Father.
All right.
That's powerful.
Thanks, man. I'm just putting here this clock so we can keep track of time. Yeah, last week, we were catching up with each other. We were talking about one thing that part of the conversation we were going to have today really is like, how do we tell our own narrative? How do we structure our work to tell our own narrative, and take hold of it and break a lot of the historical topics that are wrong. So maybe I'll ask you that as my first question. How do you do that in your work? As an anthropologist, how do you take on an issue like this? Because you worked in Chicago. Well, can you just kind of give us a little synopsis about how you were interested in how you wrote Renegade Dreams?
Yeah, thanks for that. So, yeah, I wrote a book on gang violence in Chicago called Renegade Dreams, and I focused on injury. You know, how people are injured, how they think about injury, and it stemmed from the fact that, like, at the center of that book is the disabled gang member. And so, what the book is known for is putting disability into the conversation with urban violence, because we often don't think about people who are injured and still live, you know, and like, what is it like for someone to be shot and then have to live with a disability for the rest of their lives? And in Chicago, you know, you see a lot of young African American men in wheelchairs, and it's a kind of striking image. And you know, it leaves a lot of questions about you know, what that means for them, what that means for their families, what that means for their communities. And I was drawn to your work in particular because I noticed we were doing, at the same time I was doing research for that book, you were you know, taking pictures, and you captured young men who had been paralyzed. And that always struck me like, okay, I'm not the only one seeing this and like being struck by this juxtaposition. And so I think like part of your question, you know, it's about like narratives that have been silenced, you know? And I think like the disabled young person is one of those narratives that have been silenced. And even the title, like we think about protest and mourning,
Yes.
there's a lot of protests that go unacknowledged, especially in Chicago. It's like every week, every day, there's people like working on the issue of gun violence, gang violence, like trying to make their community safer, police violence, you know, every day. And there's people being affected by that, and yet it doesn't really get that attention. It crystallizes in particular moments. And so part of what happens when there's this large event where it crystallizes is that it's because people have been doing this for so long, and then something becomes the final straw, then it blows up, and it becomes like, oh, we have video evidence of this one case. And so now that one case becomes the case that we talk about what people have already been doing. And so there's so much mourning and protest. And then there's this, you know, there's a way that mourning itself becomes a protest too in Chicago. Where, you know, like you see all those memorials, you know, of people who have been slain, and you capture this in your work as well, just like those, you know, teddy bears and cards and balloons and just on street corners, right? That's like mourning and a protest at the same time. It's like somebody acknowledged that this is happening, right? And so I think, you know, what I try to do in my work is just like keep record of that and talk about like what that means for people always, and not just in these particular moments, but like always, what it means for them always, and how they're trying to understand that, you know, always as a way to make sense of their lives and in their communities, you know.
Yeah, no, and I mean that brings a lot of things, right? Like I want to ask you, and I wrote it down, but I want to ask you, maybe later on we could get into like, as a father, how do you feel about doing this work as a father? I know I'm thinking about it different as a father, but you know, you're talking about mourning, and then it makes me think about family. And you know, a lot of people don't think, you know, they don't think that like Black folk and brown folks in these neighborhoods have family that cares. You know, there's always this like other thing that comes with it, and I think the saying kind of always goes the same, right? It never changes, right? It's like, well, where were the parents, or what were they doing here, and then, you know, where was the intervention? And I believe that, like, that's such an old way of you know, thinking. Like, there's parents who take care of their kids all the time and just can't keep them, you know, they can't keep them close to them enough where they can protect them at all times, because you just can't, right? That's the risk you take when you're a parent in the world. But that kind of takes the forefront of the conversation when it comes to saying, you know, and I think that's part of like the saying, the hashtag that came in the movement around Black Lives Matter, right? Is having people understand that, you know, the violence on the street is historical. It's been around for a long time, but the action that we're taking is an action of saying that our lives do matter, right? That we are here and we should be seen, you know? And so a lot of those things that you were saying reminded me of family, of the orientation, because those protests and mourning, you know, you can't mourn without family, right? You can't mourn without community. You can't protest without community. And so I think part of what we're doing is capturing all that, but also capturing the other behind the scenes, like what happens to a young man. That's what my film that's going to be at Tribeca is about. It's about this young man named Andali Petit, who's now 20, I'm sorry, he's probably 25, he's going to kill me. I met him when he was 14, and he's paralyzed. He was shot right here, and the bullet went through his spine. But his mother always took care of him, you know, and she was filming him. And I found this audio tape this videotape that she was keeping this record of his life as he was developing to live again, you know. And so that, like, you know, that's also part of the protest, right? Is getting up out of your wheelchair and living, you know, and taking it. And Adali was, you know, and shot at a party. This other young man brought a gun and shot him. You know, Adali wasn't in gangs. He wasn't in trouble. He was just at a party, you know. So I think those things we don't think about when we think about shooting, when we think about the young people being in wheelchairs, the life after death, you know, life after being injured, you know. I don't think people think about it outside of maybe our communities and people that are going through it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I like, you know, the title of the film, We All We Got, because I think there's an acknowledgement that nobody else recognizes our value and our humanity except for us, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that is like a form of like protest too, because it's just acknowledgement of the reality, and it's acknowledgement of like the lack of you know, intervention, you know, in good faith. And yeah, I think, you know, I think family becomes an easy scapegoat. It's always been that way. You know, since, probably, you know, since emancipation, right? Since after slavery, where like, because there's this idea instituted in slavery to maintain it, that these people are uncivilized and that they can't care for themselves. So once, you know, they're emancipated, that idea remains, but it just takes shape in the form of the dysfunctional Black family, right? And so, so we're still living with that residue today. And so that becomes an easy scapegoat for like why you're not educating, you're not investing in certain communities, why you're not providing resources for them, why you're exploiting them, extracting resources from places where they live. And, all of this violence is a byproduct of that. But it's important to recognize like what kind of cultural myths perpetuate that, and allow people to be comfortably ignorant of that, and to keep their distance from certain communities and certain problems. Because again, like when you go into these communities, you see how much people are working to, again, solve these problems on an everyday basis. And part of the reason why I wanted to like focus on the problem of gang violence in my book is just to show that like even people who are like self-proclaimed gang members are not just gang members in those communities. Like there's still people's sons and brothers and grandsons, and they're still loved within that community. And that label of the gang doesn't erase that. And there are still people that really care about them and are affected, when they suffer the consequences of violence. And so I think that's an important angle of the story, and an important, I think, way to kind of demystify some of the things that are going on. Because I think in our generation of researchers, I think part of the obligation in our generation of researchers is not to reproduce certain myths, because now there are, more people of color doing the work that was once exclusively or almost exclusively done by white researchers, right? Who a lot of times perpetuated these myths and even created them. And so I think it's part of our obligation to really interrogate that and to say that, actually that's not true, and that's not how it looks, and that's not how, it's not what I see. And in some cases, I'm from this community, I'm from similar communities, and I know that's never been the reality. And I think that's part of what we have.
Yeah, and so that really kind of takes place of family keeps going, because then you create your own family at all. Especially when you're poor, you figure out different ways of creating family. So that's something that never goes away. You find a way of having somebody in your neighborhood, like the neighborhood structure of having a matriarch who takes care of the whole hood or the barrio at the same time when there's somebody missing, right? But then, and I mean, like, there might not be a mother or a father in a certain home, but you have one person or two people on that block. And this happens in high-rise poverty or in poverty spread out through neighborhoods, who take care of, and this happens to white folks too, who take care of each other, this happens to our poor white brothers and sisters as well. There's that relationship, and I guess most of the times in our communities, people don't see it because they don't visit, because they might not be engaged with that community. But that's one of the things I wanted to show in my work, was to make sure that besides all the heartaches that happen every day with violence, there's also the structure that exists, and then that structure can be broken easily through violence, through being through a family member being shot or killed, because then you move into another neighborhood because you want to get away from it. And I think that's one of the things that we're now actually talking about more than ever. Hopefully, people are really realizing that issue. I don't think it's being fully addressed. So that's just one thing that you made me think about. Another thing is, I want to ask you, if you want to riff on that, please. But I also want to ask you a question about the structure of your work. So.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So like when you have an idea, right? And you can ask me, and we can talk about this. But when you have an idea of a topic that you want to take on and study, what part of the human experience do you think about or bring to the table? Is it something that you witnessed when you were younger and you always wanted to talk about, and you can visualize it and see it? You don't have to answer it that.
Yeah. I think different projects come to me like for different reasons.
Yes.
Me too. I think they're always. I'm always trying to wrestle with. I think one of the key ways that I approach it is like, what are people already doing to address this problem? Like, I kind of like to see like how people are grappling with an issue, like whether it's police violence or gang violence or what have you. And I think that goes against the grain of the way that even I've been taught to do research, and that is to presume that I as an expert have the answer to the problem that exists. Like, I don't want to presume that. I want to see what people are already doing to wrestle with that problem, and then like what are ways that I can help to address that issue. And so like, when I enter a project, I enter a space, it's like entering a space as an academic who wants to also help with this issue. And it's like entering on an even or a more equal playing field than to presume that I have a solution to that issue and I'm going to give them a solution, because I don't think that I'm equipped to do that, or any researcher is really equipped to do that, right? Like, what we're equipped to do is to like understand different perspectives, to maybe put people in conversation with each other who weren't necessarily in conversation with each other before, and to maybe amplify those concerns at a different level, so maybe they get the attention that it deserves. And so I think that's a lot of what I'm doing when I start a project, or when I enter a space, because I think when I enter a space in that way, people can always say that they don't need my help, or they don't feel like they want a researcher to be there, and that's fine. And given the history of the way that, again, researchers have like exploited people and communities and just taken from them and not given anything back, I can understand that, and I don't have to necessarily, participate. But I think, just coming from that space has afforded me a lot of opportunities, because it just means like a different kind of engagement. Oftentimes it means a longer commitment, a long-term thing. And it means like constantly being in dialogue, constantly going back, giving back, and, using my role to amplify particular concerns. And
are you what are you influenced by? Are you influenced by like, I can tell you what I'm influenced by too, but are you influenced by imagery, by historical text, poetry? Because people don't think, or changing the way that anthropology was visualized from this kind of again, because people of color weren't in academia at the time, had the access to it, changing that perspective, that white perspective to a population, or seeing that it was right, I know that's a lot of questions. But visualizing the story and how you tell it, because when you tell a story, you're really good at bringing a visual language to an audience. So when you work, how do you compose your visual language? From and the comparison of the folks you're studying.
I think about it in two different ways. And one is like how to do research, and then I guess the other one is like how to convey the research, or how to produce something out of it. And so I think when you think about how to do research, I'm influenced by a lot of like indigenous studies. And the way in which people have had to engage with indigenous communities or Native American communities in the U.S. So because of the way in which indigenous communities, in a lot of cases, have gained their own autonomy and their own sovereignty, they've been able to dictate the conditions under which research happens. And because of that, it's been more mutual beneficial. So they'll say like, in order to engage with our community, you have to teach the people who you want to engage with for a particular skill, and then maybe we can equally do something that benefits the community. Or like there's been a lot of art, photography, and video projects with people like Jean Roche, who like taught people camera techniques, and they went out and conducted their films, and then they do a film project together, a joint film project. So there's a lot of these experimental practices where the researcher and the community decide to do something together. So I'm like influenced by that. I try to create conditions where I can engage in a project like that with people if they're willing to do so. And just the other part of it, just the product part, or how you convey it. I think that because it comes from that aspect, I'm like interested in like what people are writing in communities and like what they're producing and what they're doing. And so like a lot of my scholarship has like, it grapples with like the writing that people are doing, or their poetry, or the books that they're writing, or whatever they're producing. And I try to like engage with that, whether it's like a mural or something like that, or art, like how are they trying to convey something? And I think that, underlying all that is like the humanity and aliveness. And I think that's part of what resonates with the work you do as well, that I see in your work, because the topic is so heavy, and because it's about like violence and injury and death, like they're looking for ways to show that people are also producing, and it's also they're alive and they're living and they're making a life and they're making a way. And so like the ways that they're doing that then become a focal point of what you're doing as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, no. I mean, murals to me, murals are, they're these things that like might live for 20 years. They won't live forever, right? Because someone's going to paint over them, or something's going to chip, or that building might get destroyed. And so, going around and photographing these murals, the storefronts, like when I got when I got to work on the case for reparations, I read the text, the quotes that Ta-Nehisi wrote, and I already knew that text, in a way. And I learned so much that I didn't know, right? And it just brings all these things together. But I was like, I know where to go, I knew where to go. And a lot of those buildings are gone. Like I can take a picture in front of those buildings now, and they're gone, and they were historical buildings, churches, the part of the great metropolis, part of what Black culture built, or what coming into a European neighborhood where Black culture changed and thrived differently, and so when you're breaking this down, right? When you're breaking this down, it really reminds me, and it's really important for me to know that part of it, because we never had a chance to talk about this. We're actually doing it right, live. We're always kind of catching up on other stuff, but we're doing it right now. We're having this conversation that we would probably have if we were having a drink or some coffee or dinner or whatever together. So I'm learning, I'm learning about your process too, and it's, it's crazy, because a lot of the times I would take pictures for notes. I would film stuff for notes, and then those notes that I would film or photograph would become part of the story. It might not fit right now, but later on, when I think it's a development thing too, right?
Yeah.
You develop as a human being. You develop as a person. Your knowledge of the neighborhood and the people, even though they're your people, you're always learning, right? So there's this Polaroid I took of Black Jesus holding these babies. I don't know where that if that mural still exists, but it was like this portrait of Black Jesus with dreadlocks holding a white baby, a Black baby, a brown baby. There was a sheep, and that story to me was very important, just in that mural. And then all these things that are going around the neighborhood, it was next to a liquor store on the corner where the train sits, and there's a lot of stuff going on in that neighborhood. There's a lot of people selling stuff, but then there's that Black Jesus holding them beautiful babies, like a white baby, a Black baby, a brown baby, right? And so like what does that do to maybe what does that do to another human to make them think about their actions, or if that makes them think about being safe, about being in a different environment. I don't know, I just ask myself those questions, right? Like what do these structures in urban environments do to change human behavior? And I mean, that's like philosophical, but I wonder, do you think about that when you're writing? Does that inspire you to think about humanity differently?
Yeah, like I think a lot about like how things came into being, like how it came to be, like so how did that like mural come to be? Like what? So sometimes like if I see something like that, then I'll tell the story of like how that came to be if I'm able to, talk to enough people and figure out and talk to the artist and like figure out like why he did that. And then maybe it's a story like, once this neighborhood was known for this, and once there were this was the church section of the neighborhood, or once this, maybe it's like a story like that, or maybe it's a story like, there was a lot of violence here, so I painted this to stop it, and I felt like this would, and so it's like, I think how things come into being is an interesting question, right? And I think that we can't presume that we know how it came into being. But I think in answering that question, we always kind of peel back layers of, of humanity, and like why people kind of do the things that they do. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about before in terms of like the work, the art that people are producing, right? And I noticed that, like, in a lot of your work, like, you'll have pictures of like RIP t-shirts that somebody did, somebody did a lot of work to do that. Or like you'll even take pictures that people took of other things, people that have maybe passed. And there's something like and I feel like you're in a way like archiving, and in a way like, documenting. But also I think it's a question of like, that there's a story behind why that person has on that RIP shirt in the moment, And I think that's the powerful aspect of it, because it's like, when I see things like that, I want to delve into like the backstory of it. But you're presenting like the image that's very striking, and that just stops you, and that makes you say like, man, like what is that?
Yeah, and we should bring Grace in, but yeah, it makes me think about family, right? And I think full circle is like, protest, mourning, and family, and memory, And then last real quick question is like, how do you do your work different, becoming a pops, becoming a father? Because, people don't think that like men of color really think about being fathers, or it's not present in their lives. But I just want to touch on that right quick.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. And like when I did my first book on gang violence, like I moved into a neighborhood that was, had a big gang problem, and I was living there for a year, and I was just like talking to everybody, hanging out. Like I wouldn't do that now.
Yeah.
As a young person, I feel like that's the way that made sense to me.
Yeah.
And I know that I wouldn't do that now. Like I wouldn't. Like I see so many dangers in that. And like, even yesterday, I saw two kids who are like teenagers, probably like 15, 13. They were playing with a toy gun. And I was just like, wow, that's like so dangerous. Like to play with a toy gun in the street. I was like, wow. And I remember like my parents like, you can't get a toy gun, and saying not to play with a toy gun, and not understanding. And it's kind of like that. It's like the danger was always there, but I kind of really didn't know the significance of it at the time. I thought I was just doing this project. And now I look back at it and even read the book, I'm like, wow, that was just so dangerous,
I know.
So I think so when I was doing that book, it was like, I think it was like sculpting in a way. It's like you get all this information And like now you were saying, like you take pictures and you just take them as notes and then later they become part of it. It's like I'm doing all these things, taking all these notes. I don't know what's part of it and what's not. And at the end, it's like I'm sculpting this thing out of everything that I have, which is so much stuff. But now I'm like way more intentional. And I think that's
I know.
Building connections. Like I do so much work now. And also because of time, I have the luxury of like knowing people for a long time and them trusting me in a way that they before. And so I can say like, oh, we should do a project about this. And then I can work with people to do it. But back then I couldn't. So I'm like so much more intentional about what I do and how I do it and who I'm working with. And I know now, like when I see something, I know exactly how I would write about it.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
Yeah, it's almost like taking a picture. It's like you know the composition, so it's like I experience something, and then I can say like, oh, I already know what parts of the dialogue, what parts of everything that's gonna create the scene that and why it's meaningful and everything like that. Where before I didn't know, and so I think, you know, part of that has to do with me having a family because I am not gonna put my family at risk in the same way that I put myself at risk when I was younger. And it's also just being more seasoned in my craft where I know, you know, how to do certain things. And I think it's also helped me just to know like what's important, like to stay grounded in a way. And I think we were talking earlier about like before this started about like research in academia and conceptualizations and like I'm interested in things that like a lot of that doesn't matter to me, like even if it's you know, like in vogue in terms of academia, and because I'm grounded in a particular way. For me, that's rooted in family, and so I'm always going to, you know, center that in everything I do, including my work, my writing. So,
should we bring Grace in?
Well, yeah, I wanted to hear about what you were saying about how.
Oh man, I mean, I think, you know, I feel exactly like the same. I mean, like right now, my kid is younger. He's 3, but you know, it reminds me. Here's one thing I would say is that this brought me like a lot, like this experience of being there with parents at the most vulnerable moments. My kid was sick. He almost died, and because I think we think he had COVID or something, but it was real tragic and crazy at the same time. But it really being around the film I made that's going to be at Tribeca was part of the film is I made in part the Trina Petit made about her son on the lead recovering through being shot, and it really taught me how to, and he taught me how to be strong. They both taught me how to really be strong and deal with the family structure, you know, and how to come out of it. So yeah, I mean, you know, and now I'm just I think about the exact same things you're talking about, right? Of being grounded, of moving faster, of going out with pure intention, you know. I think I'm gonna keep a little bit of that, like experimental curiosity, you know.
Yeah.
But I am more intentional now, and I've seen it pay off, right? I don't have another 10 years to go and work on something long term, and I don't have to, you know, like that's been done and proven, and it took that long of a time it took that long because that's the time I had, you know. But yeah, I'm thinking about, you know, I'm thinking about everything you're saying, and for me, it feels the same, you know. It's all these like you go out with intention, you go out with this like thought of like, you know, I only have this much time to do it. I'm gonna go do it, and then come back and, you know, and be around that boy, be around that family, be around that's, you know, that the people you love, right? And I also think, you know, we are more mature. We're a little older. We've gotten the trust, right? Because we've proven ourselves in a way. So yeah, I just want to know, man. I just like, you know, people just think at times that it's just magic. You know, what you do is magic, and it really is intention. You know, and follow through, and a lot of it is like what you're saying is listening to the people around you. So thanks for you know, I think that's a big part of our work, right? Being able to think about family, and then also like think about, you know, the people around us and how we tell stories, you know.
Yeah.
So Grace, can you come in and join us, please? There she is.
Been quietly waiting to come in. Carlos and Laurence, thank you both so much. It's really been a treat to hear you both talk about the care and the empathy with which you both approach your work and your projects and the people that you do this work with. And Carlos, I actually am really drawn to the conversation you started about fatherhood, and particularly fatherhood in this moment. I know you're both fathers, and both of you were talking a lot about family. And Carlos, I like that you've edited the title of the exhibition, Protest, Mourning, and Family. I think that's actually really insightful and really profound, because I don't know if you all picked up on this, but I think I saw, particularly in the last year, more families as a unit out protesting publicly, you know, locked arms, knowing that violence and that threat of violence of being on the streets with their families is ever present, but still are out there. And little babies, you know, we have some of those images in the exhibition on Protest and Mourning. There was something about the family unit as a very prevalent and symbolic and powerful image, particularly within the last year, that I think we really need to examine and unpack and elevate a lot more. And my question about fatherhood is really a question about fatherhood and grief, and fatherhood and mourning. I think we've done a great job of creating a lot of space and a lot of conversations around motherhood and loss, and motherhood and mourning. We featured John Henry's incredible series, Stranger Fruit, On Protest and Mourning, of what it means to be a Black mother in America in this moment. But do we need to do more work in talking about what it means to be a Black father in this moment?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. When you said that, now you're like, I saw this clip of the shooting in Miami, right, at the nightclub, and there was a father he has dreads, and he was saying, "Y'all took my baby from me," and he was real, like he was like, you all, you know, and he was, and if you look it up, it was such raw emotion, and you know, people don't think that men mourn like that, but he was just like, "What did you do to me?" You know, and nobody's really looking at that father as a figure of what this moment means, you know, for because men mourn as well, you know, and he was very vocal about it. He's very emotional in front of the camera, and very strong about it, right? And strong is good, you know, in that way. So I think we need to dive a little deeper into that, you know.
Yeah, and I would add, I think it's two sides of the same coin, in the sense of like why we don't hear about fathers, and why, you know, mothers are propelled into the spotlight often unfairly, right? And Amani Perry just had an article about Tamara Rice's mother. I think it's in the New Yorker, about why she refuses to be like a mother of the movement, right? So, you know, often when these Black children die, we catapult their mothers as the leaders of the movement, you know, going way since Mamie Till, you know, like in a way that they become the spokesperson. And I think with that title is also a kind of a coercion for them to be like a peaceful and respectful vanguard of almost protecting like American democracy, because this is in the you know, in the background, the subtext is riots, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the mother, like the face of the mother, is meant to calm us down, to allow us to grieve in a way that is forgiving of the structures that produce the violence, and you know. And this is not to like to say anything bad about mothers of the movement, but I'm just saying like this is how the position, the structural position of the mother who is in grief has worked, right, over time. And I think that that's why the father also becomes invisible, because it's like harder for, just like in a patriarchal society, like it's harder to have it the face of the father when that means something else in terms of like vengeance and anger and you know, accountability, and so I think it's part of we're really talking about like what are the acceptable ways for us to mourn, and what are the acceptable ways for us to protest, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like why are we you know, we're always afraid of the prospect of uprising, and we're always kind of trying to tamp down like a justifiable rage when it comes to these, particularly police violence. And so like we catapult certain people to these positions of leadership, even if they don't want to be in those positions, and we demand of them that they, you know, calm everybody down.
Right. Calm it down, take it down, calm it down. But then also too, right, is and Grace, thanks for like invoking these thoughts and feelings, is also too is like these mothers are responsible for calming the violence down, but yet they're also blamed for not taking care of their children, right? Or not being around, or not, you know. And we can't do that as a society. We can't do that to people, right? You know, you can't criticize a mother or a father and say that the parents weren't there, but then, you know, calm the situation down. Talk to the family. The family's saying we don't want this, and the family's, but you're talking about the family structure. You know, you're consistently talking about the family structure, that we don't have it, but yet we're holding it down from, you know, these streets burning down. So it's like we can't have it both ways, right? We need, and so I think, you know, it's really interesting that like we do this work, and now that we're having these conversations, and I can only think about this part of the conversation because I did this work, because I think Laurence did this work, you know. So and you know, and you curated us to be here in the same room to evoke these feelings out of us, which is, they're things that I never get to talk about public, you know, in a public way, because we're doing the work and we're being the person that brings the, you know, the artistry to the table, or, you know, the writing into the history book. But yeah, it's very hard.
Well, Carlos, you know, no need to thank me for instigating this particular, you know, questioning, because we have the blessing of your amazing artists and scholars and thinkers, but you're both fathers. And I don't know how any of us in this moment, in this time, can do this work without it being deeply personal to us, without us bringing in our personal lives and our positionality into this. And it really made me sad to hear you, you know, remind us of that video clip of the gentleman in rage of losing his son, followed by, who knew he could mourn like that, right? But we know he can. But feel the agency and the space to be public with his mourning. And so, Laurence, this issue about who gets to be public with their mourning, right? And we talk about mothers versus fathers, and what kind of mourning is more digestible to our public? What kind of mourning gets commodified, right? And I don't think, as a culture, we yet are ready to see fathers in that particular unique throes of grief and rage and protest and loss that Carlos was asking that question of, you know, who knew? And so my thinking, my questioning is, if we could imagine a world where fathers grieving and fathers in protest and mourning and rage is just as upfront as mothers, what does that look like for us?
Yeah.
I think it goes to a question of humanity. I think it goes to a question of dismantling particular stereotypes, because I think, again, part of the subtext is always, you know, as Carlos is pointing out, like this idea of like the dysfunctional family, pathological family. But there's also like the angry Black man, right? And I think that part of what people are reacting to are these tropes and stereotypes that have been placed on them, where like even the children who are dead, they don't even get to be children, right? They're going to be like, all the pictures are going to surface of them on Facebook, and they're going to say like they weren't an angel, and what they're saying is they weren't raised right, and maybe they did something to get themselves shot. And so I think, you know, I think the world in which we can have a father grieve is intertwined with the world where these stereotypes don't exist, you know? And so it's like, and that's a world where we see people as like fully human, and we understand that there's no, like, the grief that they're experiencing is human grief, the same way that anyone would grieve if their child died. And so, you know, we need to look at the tragedy and what caused this tragedy and things like this. But you know, we're looking with at I think we're often in conversation and conflict with this history that's always like in the background. And even like in the George Floyd trial, if you remember, like one of the people who saw it, this black man who saw it, and the one that called the police while he was testifying, they were trying to get him, like the lawyers are trying to prod him into to say that he was angry, right? And he was having a 911 call. He's seeing somebody getting murdered before his eyes. Like he has every right to be angry, and he was expressing that anger. But like in the questioning itself, he had to say that I'm not gonna let you turn me into an angry black man. And at the same time that he's like defending his right to be angry because he's seeing a murder, you know what I mean? So like there's so much like somersaults and flips mentally that we have to do just to grapple with like this history that we've been subjected to. And like we're not removed from that history, but I think that we are starting to see changes in like how we grapple with those tropes. And as Carlos mentioned, like Black Lives Matter, I mean, there's so many ways in which the movement itself has tried to, you know, really call out like a politics of respectability that protest has been in American society. It's been indebted to this politics of respectability and saying that like, no, we don't have to be respectful. We don't have to be, you know, innocent. We don't have to be upright citizens. We don't have to be all these things in order to have human dignity, right? And so I think, you know, that's what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that, you know, you said, and I'll be real quick, but you said something about like so you said something where like the father's face doesn't come in because, you know, the mother, we look as the mother to be calming the situation. Now it reminded me of, you know, Mookie in Do the Right Thing. You know, Mookie's like, he's struggling to make that money to get those pizzas, to hustle. He's dealing with his racist boss and the boys, and you know the hood is kind of crazy. He's just, you know, in and out. And then when Radio Raheem gets killed, he's like, let me protest. And he, you know, breaks the window, and the whole neighborhood goes to hell. And I think that's always in the subconscious mind of what can happen next, you know. So I think, you know, the men does get pulled to the background that of the conversation, in not exactly that way, but you know, there's always that fear of like, if you go in front of the microphones and you express your you know, your emotions or how you feel about what happened to a friend or a loved one, then there's always that threat, you know? And I think that's happened in every culture, you know? So, Grace, thanks for asking these questions.
Thank you for being so open and honest with an answer towards it. Carlos, I want to ask you a question about your process as a filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly about sound. You know, in the opening, I talked about how I was struck by this film first for its soundscape and hearing it, and then secondly for its visual narrative. And I'm being very, very honest about that. One of the things I know that moves me when I put on my curator's hat and I'm in a particular space and I'm seeing a show or I'm seeing a work of art, I've become less interested in what I'm there to see and more interested in grappling with this question, what am I here to feel? And, you know, when I listen to your film, it allows me to actually ironically stop seeing and think about that question of what am I here to feel? What am I here to feel by engaging with this work? And so I would love for you to talk about your approach to sound in this work and what your thinking was, how you came to it, your choices in the soundtrack and the composition and the score. And you also play with silence a lot in this film. Not so much a silent sound as a silent scene. And I think that's really, really, really important to note. And so if you can just talk a little bit about those things.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, like I'll start with the silence. I think the silence, you know, every story has a pause, right? Every story has a breaking point. And to me, you know, maybe it's part of my dyslexia, but I think to me, I need to be able to figure that out in a story, in the story structure. And it's just it's another, like, it's another moment to move forward, right? And at that point, you know, sometimes you can't see what, you know, like you can record something, you can film something, and it comes to you when you're there, but then when you're editing it, you need to tell a story the way you felt that story. And so I think I'm trying to take people through that journey of being there and feeling it, you know? So like hearing is a way of like you said, is a way of telling a story of feeling, of how do you feel when you're in a place, you know? And so for me, that's really what I wanted to do, is like, I hear the helicopters, right? I hear the helicopters a lot, right? How does that feel to hear a helicopter? And then, you know, and you know what it looks like, you know, but where do you know, to like, how does that feel to a person that might not see it or hear it every day? Like, I hear a helicopter, police helicopter, every day outside of the house, you know? And it's just like, it's so jarring, right? And I might be in the living room and I'll hear it and I'm like, oh, the helicopter's there. So I wanted to bring people into that environment, you know, into that environment of here we are, here's what happens, here's what we hear, you know, sirens popping, the helicopter, kids playing, you know. So and I think it's part of, in a way, of every love story when you're telling a story about a neighborhood or a people, you know. And so I try to keep that in mind when I'm editing and when I'm like composing a story. And music too. When it comes to music, it's like I have a playlist. Like, I'm working on a film and I have this playlist of you know, you're in a moment, you're listening to something, and it just brings you into that moment of relaxation and escape, you know. And I think really good filmmaking has to have that, you know, that moment. So yeah.
We have a few minutes before we go, but I just want to thank our audience for the lots of praise, lots of, you know, thank you for making this film, and what a wonderful conversation between the two of you, Carlos and Laurence. So my last question, I'll end with this before we say goodnight to our audience. Was watching this film now in 2021 on the heels of what we all went through last year, was coming back to it now, 7 years later. Did it land differently for you, Laurence, as you know, as a viewer, and Carlos, for you both as a maker and a viewer? Does it have a different taint to it now that we've been through what we've been through, particularly in the last year?
Yeah, I'll start. I think definitely for me, yeah, I think there is a difference. I mean, I think that I think now the nation kind of knows more about protest, and I think that, not only, there were more families in these protests last summer. It was also really diverse, or really intergenerational. Um, but again, I think there's a difference between like the way in which these have always been going on. Like this is like a every weekend thing in Chicago. And I think how expansive it's become. So I think there's a question of like a shared vulnerability now, that like people understand protests more in terms of like we're all vulnerable in a way, and in which I think on a smaller level, I think Carlos's film is working on a smaller level where it's like they understand in this community like their own shared vulnerability, and that they have to rely on each other. And again, we got, that's it. And like, but I think now the difference is there's a question on the table in terms of a nation. Are we going to look out for each other's vulnerability and realize like that we're all endangered if someone is being killed, or someone has COVID, or someone, is experiencing something? Are we going to eventually realize that we're all in this together, or not? Right? In the same way that the people in Carlos's film already understood that.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't have said it better. I mean, I think for me, seeing it visually, to me, that seeing it visually and picking out the characters who spoke, like Ra, he, he's in the street and he's like, I'm living, like I'm here, I'm living, and kind of bringing like that spoken word message from the neighborhood into our screens, into our lives. Very raw emotion, very, like almost prophetic, in a way. Like were the prophets all educated and wise, and because we think of prophets that way. You just don't know, right? So everybody has something to say, and he was saying very important things that I still think are important today, 7 years after it was made. So that means a lot, right? A lot of people would ask me for subtitles of what he was saying, and I would just refuse to do it, because to me, it was like, you got to go back and listen to what he's saying, and you got to understand, it's like Marley, you listen to Marley, like you just got to listen to Marley a lot of times and figure out what he's saying to you, you're not going to put subtitles. So that's just one thing that you're making me think about. And the other thing is, best friend, the one dancing, voguing at the end, like, and I never thought about how close I was pretty close to him, and his chest is like popping, and the sun is setting, and he's sweaty, and he's just expressing himself in the hood, in the barrio. And it's just like, that to me was such an important moment, because we would show the kids, and kids would laugh, and teachers would be like, don't laugh, it's not funny. But I just found it very interesting that kids would laugh, because they were, maybe they were laughing at expression, and we thought, we as adults think about maybe a phobia that we have, because a man is dancing like this, you know? So it invokes a lot of feelings and thoughts and you know, the innocence of children, you know, young people watching this and just being raw and like expressing themselves, you know? So every time I see it, it changes, you know? And now that I saw it, I was like, wow, this, you know, these are topics that we'll be talking about for the next 7, 10, 20 years, you know? And they happen like the song, you know, on the corner, the Common song, you know, on the corner. And if you never heard that song, try to find it, Common on the corner. And these are things that happen. There's stories that are told on the corner of every street. So yeah, thanks for bringing up all these thoughts and emotions.
Well, Carlos, we are grateful that you put this film out in the world. And Laurence, it's been such a gift to have you in conversation and really, for me, a very insightful and profound conversation. You really expanded the definition of protest and mourning with the conversation the two of you had tonight. So I am so grateful to both of you. I just want to remind our audience, Laurence will be, of course, doing his amazing work, but if you're in New York, you can see Carlos's film at the Tribeca Film Festival at the end of June 20th. It's screening, right, Carlos?
June 20th, yeah. And you can check my Instagram is just my name at Carlos Javier Ortiz, and yeah, all those things. But I want to really say to you, Grace and Laurence, like, you know, I know you've curated a lot of important shows and been in front of a lot of important people, and it's just an honor to be able to be picked and chosen to do this. So I appreciate you. And Brother Laurence, congrats on the Guggenheim. We haven't caught up. That's a big deal, man. MacArthur's next.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here, you know, and just to rap about your work. You know, I'm big, huge fan. And thank you, Grace, for having me. This has been a great experience.
Can we do it in person someday?
Yeah, let's do it in person soon.
Let's all do it in person. Let's all be in the same room.
Thank you both. I want to thank Ali, our amazing producer behind the scenes. Thank you for holding us down and managing us behind the scenes, Aaliyah. And thank you, as always, to our incredible team at Caddy for making this exhibition such an impactful one and for making this dialogue series such an important conversation to have. We'll see you all for our last conversation with Nadia Alexis on June 24th. She's our final artist. We'll close out on Protest and Mourning with Nadia Alexis. Laurence and Carlos, you stay right there. Everyone else, good night, be safe, and thank you so much for spending your evening with us.
Peace.